बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। अस्सलामु अलैका या रसूल खुदा। अस्सलामु अलैका या अमीर अल मोमिनीन। अस्सलामु अलैका या बीबी फातिमत ज़हरा। अस्सलामु अलैका या अबा अब्दुल्लाह। अस्सलामु अलैका इब्ने रसूलुल्लाह। अस्सलामु अलैकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातुह. Our deepest condolence to our Imam of a time, Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. This is your host, Sister Zinat. With me, I have a guest from United States of America, Alima Maryam Muaddal. Assalamu alaikum, sister. How are you?
Walaikum assalam. Alhamdulillah, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much, sister.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, sister, for being part of the studio. Today's question is about Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, because this is like the toughest time and a painful time which is going on Imam Zamana for losing the entire family in one day, and we can't even imagine that pain. So how can we, as the companions, that we desire to be the companion of our Imam, we love the Imam of a time, how can we really help the Imam of a time?
So when it comes down to our duties and responsibilities, there's two types of duties. Some of our duties and responsibilities are general duties and responsibility, and some of them are very specific to each person, individual. So some of them are alike, they're general, and some of them are just specific on depending on who the person is. So I'm going to go through the general rules. The general rule would be just obeying the regular fiqh, the ahkam that we have when it comes down to prayer, salat.
The Islamic laws you're talking about,
yes. Yes, fasting, khom, zakat, whatever we have, right? We have the
mandatory
wajibat.
Things that
the mandatory things that we do have. That's like just the baseline that we have to abide by. And I think it's just to talk briefly about this. I think sometimes we neglect them just because it's something very ordinary for us to do. But we don't regard how important it is and how much it affects us on a personal level. For example, unfortunately, sometimes brothers don't want to pay their nafaqah for their wives, right? So it's a man's responsibility, it's his wajib.
They don't even pay the mahriyas. After you've divorced, they just want to cut out
the dowry is another issue.
Another thing also, yeah.
But on a daily or monthly basis, it is wajib on a man to pay their nafaqah, the whatever expenses that the wife has, whether it's food, clothing, whatever is in her, the typical things that she needs, right? And sometimes men don't pay this, and they think, oh, it's better for me. If let's say the woman has some type of income, and they're like, okay, well, she has money, so I can like spend money on giving it into the poor. And it's an unfortunate way to think, because that's a man's wajib to do so, and that in itself will make you closer to Allah than actually paying it to the poor. Because when something's wajib versus something that's mustahab, that wajib will take you closer to Allah. So like doing your Zuhr and Asr prayer or Fajr prayer will bring you closer to Allah than doing Salat al-Layl, for example, like night prayer. Because that's mustahab, that's your wajib. And so sometimes it's important that when we look at the wajibat, we're like, okay, no, that we do this. Even if the wife does have an income, I think, and I've seen brothers who do this, that their wives will have incomes, but they still will pay for all their expenses, and they'll be insistent upon that they pay for those expenses.
Yeah, because it's their responsibility.
It's their responsibility, yes. But it's more importantly, it's their way that they get closer to Allah. If they don't pay that, and let's say a woman can forgive it, or they might, I don't know, it could be like between them, they would be like, okay, I don't want to pay, and the woman accepts that. That's fine, but they're cutting themselves loose from that reward and that growth that they can have from that. A man's growth is into paying that nafaqah and paying the expenses of the wife and paying the expenses of the children. And they'll get closer to Allah from paying that than like giving charity, because that's their wajib. And sometimes we neglect that. We think that, oh, okay, if I do Salat al-Layl, but it's more important than if I do my morning prayer. But it's the opposite. No, if our wajibat are the basis, it's the holding ground where it will get us closer to Allah. And it's the same thing, like you see in the battle of in Karbala, Imam Hussein stands up and prays, right, in the middle of it, because this is the ground, like, no, this is my wajib. I'm not giving this up, even if I'm in the midst of a battle, right? So when it comes down to our nafaqa, when it comes, all these responsibilities, something for us to be like, no, this is important, that you still try to do it. And I think and it's really important. The reason why I really try to stress on this, because sometimes we take something that's less important and we make it more important than it really is, and that will end up hurting us. No, and there's a huge effect that these wajibat have, that these necessary thing has on our soul. They change us who we are internally. They affect us in or inside. They are miracles, essentially. And so it's more important for a man to being abiding by that aspect, because it's an opportunity to him.
And he's losing expenses. What you're talking is very realistic, actually. Nowadays, when the woman is working, usually a man expects, she's working, she can pay this part of the expenses, and I can do the rest. Yeah. So basically, he's actually avoiding doing his duty, and what you're saying, he's actually making himself a little bit away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but not abiding.
Not that he's making himself away, but he's giving up an opportunity. He can get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if he's by doing that. If anything, I've seen brothers who, it's very amazing, I've seen brothers who insist that they pay, even though the wife is making enough money, he still insists, like, he still gives her a monthly check or money or whatever, that like, this is for your expenses. I'm still giving this. I'm still doing it. And it's amazing. I've seen that some brothers doing that, and it's interesting, because they know, that person knows that, hey, this is going to get me closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'm going to take this opportunity. I'm not going to let it go.
So the person actually has an idea what his responsibilities are.
Exactly, yeah.
And compared to the other men who do not have it.
Yeah,
and they just think that if the woman is earning money, she can just take care of the expenses, so I don't have to give it to her.
I mean, they would have to discuss that issue and a mutual understanding. But even with the mutual understanding, I would still recommend, if the man can pay for it, I would still recommend it, just because it will get him closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's those wajibat is what takes us closer to Allah. Yes. It's the prayers that get us closer to Allah. The mustahab prayers will help, but they will not do what the wajib prayer does.
Yes.
And it's everything in life. It's the same thing. That our wajibat is our base. And again, we say Imam Hussein, he's the one who stops in the middle of a battle, and he gets up and he does his prayer, right? And he insists, because this is wajib. And he's saying, no, I'm fighting because of prayer. I'm fighting because of Islam, essentially, yes. Right? And so it's this prayer, his wajib prayer, that makes him remember Allah all the time, right? So these wajibats it's important for us to practice, especially to make us realize that how important they are. And make us realize that, hey, these wajibats is what is affecting us internally. It changes us inside. It's essentially a miracle, because it changes who you are. Remember, we talked about us being like this clay under Allah's hands. When we do these wajibats, it makes it where that's like Allah changing us, because He told us, okay, pray. Okay, for the brothers, pay nafaqa for your wives, pay what the expenses for your wives. That's going to change you and make you a better human being, right? And doing these type of things is easier than like going through a hardship. So the more we're more consistent about these wajibats, we might not even have to go through certain hardships because of them, because that in itself is training us and making us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we should have to take that definitely in consideration when we're thinking about these things. And just to give another example, is that in the story of Yunus, Prophet Yunus alayhi salam, he ends up in the belly of the whale, right? And it's interesting in the story, he says he says this dhikr, this word, these words he says, La ilaha illa ant, subhanaka inni kuntu min al-zalimin. Oh Allah, there's no God but you, subhanaka, glorify Allah, oh how glorious Allah is, inni kuntu min al-zalimin. Oh Allah, I am the zalimin, I am the transgressor. Now, it's interesting, because if you look at the ulama, like I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ayatul Jawadi Amali says to say it 400 times, right? This dhikr is called dhikr Yunusiyya, and it's in the Quran. It's recommended to say, especially whenever someone's going through a hardship or difficulty, it's recommended to say that. And amount of times tasbih is saying, like each scholar has said different amounts of how many times you should say it. But what's interesting about Hazrat Yunus is that this prophet only said it once.
Yeah.
He says it once, and then he gets out of the belly of it, like Allah saves him, basically, right? And it's interesting that only saying it once gets him out of there. Now, it's not that he just said it, he actually meant it. It's not, he didn't just say it with his tongue and then be like, Subhana Rabbi al A'la. No, it was like, La ilaha illa an subhanaka inni kuntu min adh-dhalimin. Oh Allah, there's no God but you. And I've really messed up here. I'm really screwed up.
And
he really repented, right? He did that tawbah. He did the real tawbah. And Allah gets him out of there, right? Wow. So it's interesting, and so this is where I want to tie into. We're talking about the wajibat. He says this dhikr, and he gets out of the well. It's the same thing with our wajibat. If we really do our wajibat properly, it can change us. It can affect us as much as just saying the dhikr of Yunus. How Prophet Yunus just said it once, and he was saved from that, being in that place of being in the belly of the well. He got saved, and it's the same thing. It affects us. It can be that effective, and so we tend to underestimate that. But they're actually quite important. Now, moving on to the next point in terms of what are our responsibilities and duties toward the Imam. We're talking about the general rules that we have. Another aspect is caring for each other, taking care of each other, being there for each other, praying for each other. Right? We have. Because we're living in a society, and it's really important that we're there for each other.
Yeah, we have to take care of each other. We have to ask, like that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, especially for your relatives, ask for each other. Do not break the ties. Ask even for your neighbors. Ask for your brothers. Ask for your sisters. Do not break any kind of a tie. This is like praying for each other and helping for each other during the type of hardships.
Exactly. So being there for each other, especially the Shia. And there's a lot of stories narrated that a person would come to the Imam and the Imam would not receive them. Yes. And they would start asking, like, why is the Imam not receiving us, and what did we do? And then they would come to find that so-and-so person, so-and-so Shia, had come to them for help, and they denied that person, and they didn't help that person. There's a lot of stories like that. And then they would go take care of that person, and
then come back.
And then come the Imam, and then the Imam would receive them. Yeah. So it's interesting because it's, in the sense, those stories are telling us, like, if you're helping another Shia, it's like you're helping the Imam, essentially. Because the Shia we're in a knit. In the sense that we are all tied to one another, and we're tied to the Imam, alayhi salam. So helping each other when we can. Obviously, sometimes you can't. They can't, but at least you can pray for that person. If you can't help with that person, I'm sorry, I can't. But if you can just pray at least, right? And so it's important that we have that, and we have empathy for each other, and that we try to understand that everyone's going through something. Especially right now with COVID, with this whole pandemic, everyone is really struggling, right? A lot of people we're social distancing, but at the same time, we need each other. We need to socialize. We're human beings. We love to talk to each other. So we have to figure out how can we live with this pandemic, yet still maintain our social relationships, still be mentally healthy, because it's a mental need to be able to talk to other people, to socialize, to be there for each other, to have someone hear you and have a conversation. And so it's really important for us to recognize that we have these needs, and that's a good thing, that's not a bad thing, and see how can we take care of this need, especially right now, right? So maybe right now we can FaceTime, we can talk over the phone, or maybe we can meet out at a park and social distance while wearing masks and still have that conversation when we need to, because there's a lot of recommendations as well as all of this to not only just help each other, but to see each other in our homes. Now, why see each other in the homes? It's because when you go to someone else's house, you see what are their problems, what are they dealing with, how can you help them? But if you don't, like, let's say you visit each other at a cafe, you won't be able to really understand what's that person's struggling with. So it's important, that aspect's important. Right now it might be hard to do so, but we still can have some type of connection toward each other to a point where we can at least meet our needs. So that's really important. Also, like, I remember and I keep coming back to this point, but it's just it's a part of my life where so many people got involved. That's why I'm always able to share it, is that when my brother passed away, when you go through something like that, it's very difficult. You're very broken.
Yes.
And I remember when we told people in the morning, at night, like, our house was filled. In the first week, people were just coming and going. Like, our house was never empty. And it was such a blessing to have that, because we were in such a shock and in a state of grief that if someone there wasn't helping us and to get through things and taking care of things and cooking and cleaning, like, we wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yes.
Right? So it was such a blessing that we had the community helping us and supporting us and being there. I remember, like, I think the first week I don't remember cooking at all. My mom wasn't touching any food or anything. People were bringing us food. People were cooking at our house. Like, we weren't touching anything. And it was just, you're in such a state of brokenness that you can't do that thing. You can't do any of that. And so having that community help, like, was what gave us the momentum to be able to get through it, right? And so things like this happen. People die, people get sick, people go, God forbid, sometimes people end up with cancer, whatever it is. Like, some people lose jobs, and a lot of people right now are losing jobs. So a lot of people are struggling. And it's like, okay, if people are struggling in our community, how can we help them? For the people who've lost their job, how can we support them financially? How can we set up a system to help them? We need to come up with ideas of how can we help our communities as a whole.
That's true, because during this time of COVID and something like, people are losing their family members, people have financial issues, people are sick. So we have to be, and this is missing in the society. Yes, there are people who are doing it, but this is in majority number. It is definitely missing in the society, because people usually just take care of themselves and then they are tired.
Yeah.
So taking care when they are sick, taking care when they have financial issues, especially for the time of loneliness and depression, it's really very important.
It's really
because
important.
During the time of COVID, what I've observed is many of the people are depressed.
Yeah.
They are depressed, and they have just become very individualistic, isolated themselves, don't even want to come out. What is the reason? Why are you depressed? I am just depressed. And they just don't want to meet anyone, because they have been so much isolated in their life. And people have the habit of not really helping each other. The point that you were saying is that we have to look into the society and try to help each other when it comes to various issues. Majority of the people don't do that.
And it's unfortunate, but we have to, not only as individuals, but as a collective group. Like, it's if we want to say that we are the followers of Imam Hussein, we need to also have a community effort of not just having these type of programs for Imam Hussein, but also to help each other, because that's what Imam Hussein wants us to do, to be there for each other. I mean, the stories unfortunately, of people getting COVID is just so sad. I met one of my friends up a few weeks ago, and I came to find out that, so she's from Saudi Arabia, and her parents had gone to Iraq for ziyarat to Karbala, and so she came to Iran at the same time to do ziyarat here. So exactly when she was here, COVID struck out here in Iran.
Wow.
And so what ends up happening, they had closed all the flights from Iran to Saudi Arabia, so she got stuck here. And so she wasn't able to go home for several months. And then in the midst of all this, her parents go back home from Iraq to Saudi Arabia. And what happens is that her father gets COVID. And within 40 days, he passes away.
And so they're not even close to each other.
And she was here, unfortunately.
Oh.
And she couldn't go back home. So she was stuck here. Her father passed away. Her family is grieving. She was not with her family. I mean, already with COVID, the situation to be able to, you can't even go close to the burial. You have to kind of watch from afar. Already that's hard. But then she was here by herself. And it took herself, and alhamdulillah, she was able to get back like last week. But she, like, after her brother passed away, I think she was here for 2-3 months, and she was stuck. And it's just like, wow, like, these stories that are coming out because of the things that, the viruses can cause is just so sad and tragic. And so it's really up to us to try to be there for each other. We had another friend, unfortunately, who lost her father to the virus, and she couldn't even, they couldn't have a program for their father, nothing, and people couldn't come and like hug the person, like, the family, the relatives, all of that. And so it's such a hard thing to go through. Time. But like, so they had like an online majlis for her father, and so they were trying to, so many people were able to come online, recite Quran for them, and could give her condolences at least online. So you do the best you can, at least with what you got. And I think that's really important, is that we at least try to work with what we can, right? If we can still meet each other up in open air, right? Still social distance, wear a mask, and still see each other. If that's what we really need to do, we got to do it, right? Because we're also responsible for each other as well. The Imams want us to be there for each other, and I think that's really, really important. As much as it is that we remember the Imams of our time, that the Imam of our time and Abu Abdullah, that we also take care of each other. So I think that's really important. And another issue that also comes to mind is also raising children. I think mothers are left by themselves. They do not have that much help, and raising a child is very difficult. It's a 24/7 job, and no one can take care of a child for 24/7. Like, you need some time off.
Yes.
You need time to take a shower, to get some exercise, to get some fresh air, to rest.
To go out and spend time with your own friends.
For your own friends, right? So the mother themselves they have their own needs, and they need to have that. And so, as well as, the father also needs to be there, but as a community, we can help the mothers raise their children as well. We need to also try to, if we can, babysit, if we can do whatever we can, maybe bake some food and send it over to them, because raising children is really hard, especially when they're small, a young age. The first 2-3 years is very, very difficult. I would say the first 4 years. Yeah, first 4 years is very difficult, and it's like we need to give time to the mothers so that they can rest and they can take care of themselves. It's a wajib. It's their wajib, and not a fiqh wajib, but their mental wajib, and their also physical wajib, to take a shower, to sleep, to all of that. It's really, really important, especially the first year. The first year, it's like, the child has 24/7. They're constantly in need of attention. They have to change. You have to change diapers. You have to give them milk. They can't do anything, and
they can't do anything. They're so dangerous. It's like a terrible tool. They go out and touching anything, and it's harmful for them. So the mother has to be there, following the baby the whole time.
Exactly. So it's really important that we consider that, and we try to be there for the mothers, and try to help support each other raising children. And as the saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child. It really does. Back in the day, it used to be where, like, neighbors would watch out for each other, right?
Yes.
People would take care of each other. Families would live close to one another.
Yes.
And we don't have that anymore.
We used to have huge families living together.
Exactly.
Actually. And the woman had a huge help with cooking and taking care of kids and everything. So she did not have the burden that we have today. The woman is actually working a lot. She works outside, she works in the house all by herself, the cooking, cleaning, and the kids. So she has a limited energy, so it affects the health too after a certain time, and she's sick.
Yeah.
She needs to boost up that energy. So today's woman is working a lot more than before.
Exactly. And now we even see, like, some mothers are working as well. So it's like there's just so much on their shoulders, and it's not really fair. I think one of the things that, if you have family around, that's great. Like, families can is a help. But if we're living in countries where we don't have family around, I think it's important that in our communities we create sub-communities where we have people who live close to each other, kind of network and kind of be there for each other. I've seen this happen within bigger communities where they have, like, smaller communities there, and they take care of each other, because, like, the ones that are the sub-communities are people who basically live in the 15-minute radius from each other, so that they can visit each other at any time. They can drop whatever they want, and they can go and visit them when they need help. And so having that there is just so helpful, because then a person can easily help the other person without taking too much of a time to take, like, a 30-40 minute drive, right? So creating that sub-community, I think, is really important. It's something we need to establish within our communities, that we kind of create, like, these family type communities in our sub-communities where, okay, we are there, right? Our Christian brothers and sisters in faith, like, they have older sister, younger sister, or older brother, younger brother programs where they pair up youth, like a I don't know, let's say someone like in their 20s with a teenager. They pair them up so that they're like mentors for them, right? They have programs like that where, like, okay, so they can help the younger teenager or the tween kind of grow up and have someone to look up to. And I think there are programs out like this where we can learn from, and we can definitely use to be there for each other and help each other. And I think we need more of that. And I think that's something that we don't do enough in our communities. We have a lot of these majalises, but we don't have communities that I mean, we don't have support systems
Yeah.
embedded in our community, and something we really need, and something that we're lacking.
Yeah.
And that's why families are struggling with raising their children
I
so
think
much.
this is also one of the issue. I would say the families who have relatives living with them, even they have the same issue. When I was growing up, I saw to be with my relatives the whole time. But during this 10 years or maybe 15 years, the value of the relatives have really gone down. You know? The relatives don't really talk much to each other or go and visit their houses or help each other. They have become very individualistic. Even though the communities, the people who are living with the relatives around them within the same city, they don't have really help. But the people who are living totally different, like someone from India is living in America or Canada, without any relatives or family, it's more harder on them because they're taking care of themselves all by themselves, you know. So this thing has actually gone from humanity. So what advice that you're giving is that be helpful to each other, go out and help. This is one of the things that can make us close to Imam of a time. This is what is a desire, right? As a desire, we want to get close to the Imam of. This is the best thing. Sila Rahmi. This is the point of Sila Rahmi. Go out and help the people, help the needy. This person is a needy. The mother is a needy person.
Exactly.
What you're saying, yes.
Yeah. So inshallah, I mean, I pray that inshallah we're able to fulfill these gaps in our community and be there for
we have to realize this.
That is
we have to realize this. At least help the neighbors.
Yeah.
You know, the 5 neighbors who are living, you know, the 5 apartments we are close to, at least we can go out and help them. Give them food, invite them for dinner, or ask them if you're sick, let us know, you know. All these things, we can do it.
Inshallah we can. Inshallah we can take lessons from the Ahl al-Bayt and try to emulate them. So the next point I want to mention is doing connecting with the Imam. And I think this is kind of something we've talked about before, is that, you know, reciting ziyarat, going to ziyarat, going for arba'in, talking to the Imams, connecting with them, reciting Assalamu alaikum ya Abu Abdullah, reciting ziyarat al-Ashra. All these things help, and it's part of our responsibilities to have that connection with the Imam. Some of our Maraja, our scholars, would recite ziyarat al-Ashra every day. Some of them would recite ziyarat Jami Kabira every single day. So we have some of the scholars who would recite these ziyarats every single day, and it was because they wanted to make sure that they would connect with the Imam of the time. So it's the Abu Abdullah and also the Imam of the time. So it's important that we try to also...
Even if you're unable to recite, you know, nowadays we don't have much time. We can listen to Ziyarat al-Ashura by installing the applications.
You can do it while you're doing something. You can wash dishes while you're reciting ziyarat. It doesn't have to be that it's the only thing you're doing.
Especially when you have kids in your house, because your kids start repeating the same ziyarat in the same accent, and it sounds so sweet. You know, because they're catching up the entire dua. You know, this is actually good. We can have the audio recitation is the best thing we can have. It plays in the house because the kids are going to really catch it up.
Definitely. So, I mean, it doesn't mean, like when you're washing dishes, when you're driving to work, when you have these downtimes, when you're doing laundry, all these things, like, these are times where we can listen to something, right?
Yes.
We can put on Ziyarat Ashura, we can listen to that. We can put on Ziyarat Jami Kabira, we can listen to that. Whatever it is, like we could even like, you know, listening to Quran, all of that we can do while we're doing these things, right? If we're exercising, we can listen to Dua, Ziyarat al-Quran, all of that. So it's an opportunity to actually, you know, take advantage of that time as well. We're doing something else. So then another aspect, and another point to add to this is waiting for the faraj, right? This is something big. We have a lot of hadith about that a Shia should wait for the faraj of the Imam, the coming back of the Imam. It's one of the most important things that we can do. And that is waiting and making dua for that. Now, obviously, this is active waiting. I don't mean just sit down and do nothing. It's doing your responsibility and do your part and trying to make the reappearance happen, inshallah.
Inshallah. This is really very important that we are waiting for the Imam of a time. Exactly the same way Hazrat Yaqub said when he used to cry for Hazrat Yusuf. He says, I'm just not crying for my son. I'm crying for the Imam of my time. I know he's the Imam. He's the next Nabi who's supposed to come. That's the reason he cries so much. He cries so much that he got blind.
Exactly.
You know, that is one of his love. And over here, like Bibi Zainab was crying for the Imam of her time. And he was there to protect her fourth Imam, you know, her nephew, you know. And she was even the whole time upholding to the Imam of her time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
So it's awaiting the faraj, and that's one of the most important aspects that we were told, that this is actively waiting for the faraj and making the dua for the faraj, right? That's part of it. Also, doing Allahumma, the dua that we say, Allahumma kulli waliyaka al-hujjat al-hasan, right? So with that said, why don't we also recite that dua at the end of
Yes,
the
we
program,
should
inshallah?
recite before we end the show.
Yes. So do you want to recite it?
Yes, please, I will.
Do you want to?
No, you should
Okay,
recite it. I
inshallah.
want to
All
follow
right.
you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كل وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذا الساوي كل ساوي وليا محافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك وتمتعه فيها تبيلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
اللهم
صل
صل
على
على
محمد
محمد
وآل
وآل
محمد
محمد
وأجل
وأجل
فرجه.
فرجهم. Thank you so much, sister, for being part of the show and for answering the question, how can we help the Imam over time? Just do your mandatory things and all the rest of the things that we have been discussing. And thank you so much, everyone, for being part of this show. So stay tuned for another episode. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.